everyone. Welcome to another episode of Convos with Sazón with yours truly, Cata Mejía. With me today is a very special guest, Rehan Staton. He is an attorney and is also the founder of the Reciprocity Effect and a fellow Terp from the University of Maryland. Thank you so much for joining me. How are you today?
I'm doing good. Thank you for having me.
Of course. I know we go back a few years, but not many people know your story, at least not yet. I know you as a Harvard Law grad, as a Maryland native, as a fellow Terp, but aside from those titles and those accolades, who are you at your core and what drives you, would you say?
You know, I think I see myself much more as like a servant of the people. I think no matter what community I've been in, whether it was like Bowie State, PG County, Harvard Law School, I think typically people see me as like someone who's really in tune with the people and likes to serve.
Why do you think that's the case?
You know, I honestly just have to give all credit to my dad. He actually unfortunately just passed away, but
Sorry.
I can literally say without a doubt, you know, I've never seen someone hold so much respect amongst all of the communities he's been a part of, and service was just the way he lived. It's not like he ever like taught me a lesson on, hey, you have to do this, do that. But just kind of watching him move throughout his own life just was like the perfect example of how I wanted to live up to him.
That's beautiful, and I'm sorry to hear that he passed.
Thank you.
But what our parents teach us, right, and the role models that we have in our lives, it lives on through the legacies that we build, right?
Always.
And speaking of legacies, we'll get to that in a moment, but I know that you had a bit of an unconventional start,
For sure.
You're an attorney now, you're obviously a founder of a nonprofit, but
Definitely.
where would you say that your career started, or where would you say your journey started, honestly? If there was a turning point or a moment that kind of was an aha moment for you?
You know, honestly, it had to have been when I was at the sanitation company in 2014. And just a quick backstory on that, when I
Mhm.
was in high school and even in middle school, I was constantly barely making it by. My grades were typically putting me at the bottom of my class, not just of like my given classrooms, but of the entire student body. And quite frankly, although I wasn't good at school during that given time, I was really good at like martial arts and boxing and things of that nature. And I was winning like martial arts competitions across the nation, and things were like working out very well in my favor. But what ended up happening, I hit like a career-ending injury like in 2014, really bad shoulder injuries, which then like forced me to go find something else. And trust me when I tell you, between my cumulative GPA and between my SAT score, like no school would have taken me. So I ended up going to the sanitation company, ended up doing very well there. And there was a moment where the owner of the company told me, go to school or I'm going to fire you, was probably the single moment that changed my life forever.
What would you say highlight like or stands out honestly from your time as a sanitation worker, because that's a very unconventional
hmm
path. I don't think many people talk about what it takes or what does even a typical day look like, especially as young as you were, to be
Gotcha.
in that field that doesn't get a lot of credit.
You know, one thing I like really just have to say right off the back is the biggest myth that has ever existed in the sanitation industry is that that industry gets paid a lot of money.
Okay.
That applies to like New York, relatively speaking, but in most other states, that's just like literally just not the case. And the reason why I'm just saying that is I remember whenever I typically say that to people, I say, man, sanitation workers make a lot of money. And I'm like, brother,
Where?
yeah, like, what state are you talking about?
hmm
Saying that to say though, full transparency, I worked in the container division. So what that means is my job was taking refurbished. My job was to refurbish dumpsters that have been out for like months or years, and pretty much get it back into shape. And you would never know what you would find. You could find a grenade, which is the craziest thing that I found.
What about the smells?
The smells were, quite frankly, in the summertime, that was the worst experience of an odor that I've ever come across in my life. Summer times were not pretty. Saying all that to say, there were like long days. You start around like 6 o'clock. You might end around 3 p.m. on a good day and like 8 p.m. on a bad day. Really just depends how many containers they brought to you. And on a given day, if I were to have to get on the back of a truck, those were the worst days. But the reality is there were people who did that as like their full-time job, and I still to this day do not understand like how they were able to keep doing that from
Why
day to
was it
day.
a worst day?
What's that again?
Why was being on the back of the truck one of the worst days?
Well, just think about summertime. You need to be layered up because if some of these different types of bacteria would get on your skin, like,
Mhm.
that can leave you in really bad shape. You can get hit by a car, you can fall off the back of the truck. The smells are horrible. You might get bit by some type of animal or at worst even like a poisonous bug. All the and even at the as worst, you can get shot on the back of the truck. Like literally the sanitation company I work for, there was a story the other day about someone getting killed on the back of the truck. And you just never know like what's going to happen like when you get on that truck. And quite frankly, you also just don't have a lot of years on you in that job. I mean, your body's getting pounded and pounded every single day. And quite frankly, it's also just a thankless job. Most folks are knowingly looked down upon. Most people find it hard to hold that job with pride because, quite frankly, you're like the butt of every joke in your personal life when you're a sanitation worker.
Did you experience jokes like that?
Oh, of course. I mean, even when I would go to school, like sometimes people would make fun of me for like what I was wearing. Um, I remember one of the worst stories was I was working in the DC yard on Polk Street back when that yard was open, and I remembered I was doing a container, and a woman was walking with her son, and she pointed to us and said, "Don't be like them." And it was just
If
interesting.
she only saw you now.
Yeah, only if she saw me now, right? But the reality is, and I'm grateful that I went on to do the things that I went on to do. But even when I think about my coworkers who are still there, like I look at them with a lot of pride. I look at them as my mentors. A
Of
lot of
course.
folks see me as well, I guess like when I say I have mentors, people might think of CEOs, people might think of professors.
Mhm.
But quite frankly, I would have never gotten to this stage if it wasn't for those guys. They were formerly incarcerated folks. They're still a lot of them are still currently in the sanitation industry, and those are just some of the most stand-up people that I've ever met. And even if they stay in that position forever, I just think we should look at them with a lot of dignity and a lot of gratitude for what they do on a daily basis.
And as the human beings that they are.
For sure.
Your job does not define you at the end of the day. It's who you are at your core, how you treat others, which I think you're a prime example of that as
Thank you.
well, because even though you were able to move past
Mhm.
that, you very clearly don't think that you're better than them,
Not
and
at
you
all.
cherish that time as what kind of set the foundation for where you are now.
1,000,000%.
So to get the timelines right, you were doing that while you were at school. How long were you at the sanitation department for?
Well, it was just on and off for like
Okay.
those 4 years. Like, I was never there like throughout an entire year. But quite frankly, there would be times where like maybe my dad needed the extra help, so I would have
Mm.
like maybe like a month stint or multiple, a few months stint, and I would just work there full time during that, during that time frame, and then I'd go back to being a student. So that would just be on and off. But when I would work, I'd often have to wake up at like 4 o'clock, get to the yard by 5. I'd go to school around 9 or 10 a.m. And then when I'm done with school around 3, I have to go back to the yard around 4 a.m. to finish out my day. And so my day typically didn't end until 8 o'clock. Then I would go and study. And that was while also holding like different student leadership positions and all of that.
Yeah. I think that's my gosh, I already know this story, and
Yeah.
the admiration doesn't just stop there,
Yeah,
because I think it says a lot about who you are and what you believe in, and the fact that you did not let your circumstances define you,
for
and
sure.
you were looking to move past it. And so, okay, you did your time there, right?
Mhm.
The on and off for 4 years or so.
Oh, can I just pause on one more point
Of
on that?
course.
And I think I just have to keep going back to my dad. Like literally, he was a sanitation worker, and we grew up like very impoverished, ever since maybe the age of like 8. I often struggled with food insecurities, housing insecurities, you know, y- we often like lacked electricity, and like he would always like work 1 jobs, 2 jobs, 3 jobs, and he never complained,
Mm.
and he always found ways to get me what I needed. And so I think what sometimes gets lost in this story, one of the main reasons why I went back to being a sanitation worker was because my dad suffered a stroke when I transferred to the University of Maryland. And so I was then kind of forced to make a decision. Do I want to save my house from foreclosure? And, and do I drop my degree, or do I get my degree and let the house go? And I just tried to say, well, maybe I can do both. And watching my dad, because I mean, there were times my dad would start work at 6 a.m. and he wouldn't finish the day until 12 a.m. And so, he'd get 6 hours of sleep on a good day. And so I just have to, again, still say, my dad set the example for, waking up, doing what you have to do, and, providing the best way you can, and then at least hoping for the best after that.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I think you're a prime example of many things, one of those being that your circumstances don't define you, and it's on you as well as the opportunities that present themselves, right, to make the most out of the situation. So you went to Bowie State, you transferred to the University of Maryland. How did you decide what you wanted to study after essentially getting the rug pulled from under you by the injury that you had a couple years back?
Well, that was just all genuinely just true luck. So again, what ended up happening was I created a process for this company that I was working for that ended up really helping my division. My manager didn't take credit for it. He ended up telling the owner of the company. The owner of the company then came and told me, what are you doing here? Or asked me, what am I doing here? To which I said, I'm just trying to get paid. That kind of annoyed him and he walked away. He eventually came back and he essentially threatened me with firing me if I didn't go to school. And I told him I couldn't, and he didn't understand that I actually did really bad in school, at least in grade school. So he ended up helping me get into Bowie State University. I didn't know this at the time, but he did. And then he ended up giving me a mentor who changed my life forever. And this mentor essentially transformed my way of thinking in a way that I saw myself, and I was able to identify myself with college and higher education in a way that I would have never have seen myself before. So I was interested in history, and just at least in the context of just reading and whatnot. So he just said this would be a good start. Pick it as a major. You can always change. And it was kind of just a really random instance. He said, "Wait, what interests you?" I said, "History." He said, "All right, there you go. Get a degree in it." And even when I was going to transfer, even when I transferred to Maryland, the only reason why that happened was I started getting 4.0s. He called me into his office and he said, "Okay, I want you to transfer schools." I said, "What did I do wrong?" Because I thought I was being punished, right? Because Bowie State ended up becoming my home. And so I'm like, why are you taking this away from me? And so that was a very emotional moment because I really was kicking and screaming when I was being told this. And he said, well, when I got to Bowie State, I was given a food scholarship. I was given 5 different families who I could house hop with. So I always had heat, electricity, and I got access to tutors. He said, now go somewhere where you don't have that and do it again. And that's how you're going to show me you're intelligent. And I said, okay. And applied to the University of Maryland, got in, and then I did it again.
And you continued studying history there?
Continued studying history.
Wow. What, in addition to, I mean, oh my gosh, that's incredible. In addition to obviously attending school, you said that you had leadership positions in grade school. Did you continue that? Were you able to make time for that as well?
Oh, apologies. I didn't mean to say I had a leadership position in grade school. I was more so meaning while I was working full time, I also had leadership positions at Bowie State at the University of Maryland.
Got it. Okay. So what were those? What did you get involved in?
So I was the president of the History Undergraduate Association at Maryland. There we go. I was the student history representative for the dean's representative. I was a dean's representative of something.
Dean's council or
exactly.
something.
But then my coolest thing was I ended up getting appointed to be the only student representative on the dean's cabinet, along with the other trustees of the college. And so that was probably my biggest appointment, of student leadership, period. And then luckily I was able to even graduate as speaker of the class at the University of Maryland.
Cheers to that.
Cheers to that.
Proud of you.
Thank you.
That's a big deal.
Mm-hmm. And so, and I guess one of the proudest moments was one of the biggest setbacks I had was I actually graduated. Like I walked across stage spring 2018.
Okay, so
But
we're the same class.
no, I'm not. I got brought back. I got
They
brought back.
missed you so much that they were like, "You're coming right back."
So I ended up not taking a Spanish course.
Oh my goodness.
And so I ended up taking it again. Not again, but I ended up taking Spanish 2 or something, whatever it was called. And then I got this commencement speaker. And so it basically, in short, like I thought that was the biggest setback in the world when I got brought back. But it ended up like catapulting me because I ended up getting those two. Well, I did the commencement for the undergraduate, the major undergraduate ceremony, but I also did the commencement speaker for the history graduation. So I got to be a dual commencement speaker.
Had
So
you done public speaking prior to that?
I just started getting into public speaking. So I ended up doing a panel earlier that year for like transfer students. And one woman came to me and said, you reminded me of Obama. And I was like, wow, that was like such a great compliment in terms of like my speaking ability. So I basically said, I'm gonna dedicate the rest of this year to public speaking. And if she would have never made that comment, I would have never tried out to be the commencement speaker.
What you just said, I think, is so important to touch on because sometimes we are so caught up in our own point of view that we don't consider these other options for
For
us, and
sure.
I'm seeing a little bit of a pattern here. The first mentor that you had, it
Exactly.
took him giving you an ultimatum for you to be like, okay, maybe college is my route.
Exactly.
It took somebody else to be like, hey, I see potential in you. And so I don't know if you're religious, but regardless,
For sure.
whatever your translation of this is, but it's almost like they're little angels on the way, to guide your
1,000,000%.
path, to give you a different set of perspectives. And I think that's so important. I think
A
it's
million
to
percent.
have a support system, first of all, is huge, but also these little comments, which aren't actually that little because they have an impact on you,
Exactly.
can truly transform a life.
1,000,000%. I mean, that's why whenever people tell me I'm self-made, I just think that's like the biggest joke that I could ever ever sit upon, because the reality is like I feel like what I turned into was the manifestation and like the support of so many different individuals giving me different pieces of strength, different pieces of courage, different pieces of just wisdom that ended up making me walk this path.
Yeah. But give yourself credit too,
Hmm.
because you could have very easily heard all of these people say what they did and
Yeah,
kind of like in one ear, out the other.
for
But you did
sure.
take the time to be open, to actually consider it. The most
Definitely.
recent story that you shared of public speaking, you said it
Hmm.
yourself. You dedicated significant time,
Definitely.
to actually take it into
For
fruition.
sure.
And
For
look at
sure.
where it's led
For
you.
sure. For
I'm
sure.
curious to know if you've ever, and we haven't finished
Mhm.
obviously talking about your journey, but I do think it's important to talk about, did you ever doubt yourself or did you ever have moments of, oh my gosh, like, yes, I'm here for a reason and I've prepared for this moment, but I'm a little nervous.
Oh,
Or
all the
do I
time.
belong? The infamous imposter syndrome. Like, have you ever felt that? And if you have, share a little bit about how you dealt with it.
Yeah, I mean, all the time. I mean, the reality is the one place that I've felt comfortable was essentially in some sort of combat sport. Like till this day, that was probably the only place I could remember me just saying, I have no insecurity, period. Everything outside of that to me is like just me trying to figure out how to fit in. Because, the reality is I was not on this path until at least around the age of like 18. A lot of people were built up to be here. I made adjustments on the fly that eventually helped me get here. But that then comes with other things I didn't prepare for, obviously. And so I guess like in short, just simply saying I always consider myself courageous, not fearless. So I'm often nervous. I'm often like a little shaken, regardless of what I'm doing. But the reality is, I think courage just allows me the opportunity to test myself, test my boundaries. I mean, as far as we know, we only live once. And I would like to be able to say, I have a lot of stories to share and I never let my insecurities stop me from doing something. Because I mean, like, yeah, you may be nervous, but like, it's just a moment. I don't
Mhm.
remember last week. And I'm just simply saying that means if it goes wrong, I'll probably forget about it at some point. And if it goes right, it's another story I could just add to a list of stories that might help somebody else one day.
I love that because it also shows that your outlook has a big impact on how you approach things,
For
the whole
sure.
half glass full versus half glass empty.
For
And I
sure.
love the approach that you apply because, like I said before, I think it is really common to get stuck in the day to day, the
Mm.
challenges, as opposed to being like, okay, if I want this to happen,
Yeah,
let me apply myself. And if I'm feeling nervous, it will come and go, but I'm here for a reason at the end of the day.
for sure.
So, okay, we covered ground
Mhm.
through the University of
Mhm.
Maryland. Then what?
So, ironically, my story ended up becoming very anticlimactic. Uh, so
I would beg to differ.
I appreciate you. I appreciate that. But so what ended up happening was, and I do want to like say something that I don't think I've ever said like publicly before. Is this probably I think this is my first time ever saying this publicly. But when I used to tell people I wanted to go to law school, that was only strategic so people would take me seriously as a history major. Like,
Thank you for sharing that.
yeah. Like whenever somebody would like ask me what I want to do, like history majors tend to either go and get a government job, or they might go work at a museum, they might go get a PhD or a master's, or they go to law school.
Mhm.
Like those typically are the paths. And so because I never wanted to get like, I guess, shunned or like pushed out by someone who didn't really know me well, and I didn't want to get judged for my major, as silly as that sounds, I basically said, this is like the first path to getting a law degree, which I was essentially not sincere in that at all.
Yeah.
But so like then the question is, well, how did the law degree actually come to fruition? And so what ended up happening was I actually almost died after I graduated from undergrad. So I
Oh gosh.
graduated December 2018.
Okay.
Ended up getting really, really, really sick. If I remember correctly, I dropped to 114 pounds, and I didn't have access to like really good healthcare at all. And I don't think I had health insurance either. And so what ended up happening was my dad was then forced to like start working again, despite like his ailments from the stroke. And
What was your dad's name? I feel like we have to honor
Reggie,
him in this way.
appreciate you. His name was
Reggie?
Reggie. Yeah.
Okay.
And so he ended up having to go back to work. And I'm sitting here just withering away. And I remember we were so broke that he had to like when he got me food, it took away from the mortgage. And so our home was getting threatened with foreclosure again, which was crazy because I spent so much time trying to make just
Ends
like,
meet.
yeah,
Yeah.
like when I was like in school. So like it was like, oh man, like all of this is for nothing. I'm withering away. I'm 114 pounds. I'm speaker of the class here, speaker of the class that. It's not really amounting to anything right now. And it's like the most anticlimactic ending you can think of. Because the reality is people actually did think I was gonna die and we were preparing for that. And so were you able to say something?
Yes, I was actually gonna ask you, what made you think that it was on you to step up? Was it your dad explicitly asking you, or was it something that you saw what your dad was going through and, the state of your family, and you were like,
Mhm.
I want to do something about it?
Good question. I mean, the reality is like when you find a team, you just never want to leave your team hanging. Like some might say like a best friend, someone might say like a father, a son, a brother, um teammate on a basketball team, I don't know. I just think the reality is like the way that my dad raised me, like we always kind of think of the collective. And like I've seen my dad struggle his whole life, and don't get me wrong, we you do have to prioritize your own well-being. But when you associate your well-being with the collective, that mathematical equation looks a little different.
Yeah.
And so when I was looking at my pops, I was essentially like, all right, well, I'm down, but I'm not out. I may die, but I'm not dead yet. So what can I do with the time that I do have, assuming this is the end? And essentially, as crazy as it sounds, and I remember like people told me I was on crack, like verbatim, like that's what they were saying. I had this whole plan. I was like, if I can get to Harvard, Oxford, or Yale and die there, my dad would probably have a higher likelihood of getting support from people with resources than if I were to just die right here on this couch. And so then the question becomes, well, how the hell are you going to get to Harvard, Oxford, or Yale? My
Because it
initial
turned into kind of something that you said from the outside looking in, but it wasn't actually something that you had in mind.
exactly. And so then, so because I mean, my initial idea was actually like getting a job at a very like prestigious place and using those resources, but no one was going to hire me the way I was looking. It was really bad. So that's then the second plan was okay. Uh, Getting into a school, and maybe I should actually backtrack for 2 seconds. There's a guy named Dominic Willis who I have to give credit to on this because
Shout out
yeah,
Dominic.
shout out Dominic. Because what happened was he actually came into the room when I was ill and he said, can you do the Steve Jobs thing one more time? And what that meant was, everyone back home called me Steve Jobs because they always said Rehan has creative ways of solving problems. He could see things that other people can't see. And he asked me to do it one more time. And when he actually said it, I actually got annoyed and I told him to leave because I just didn't want to hear that right now.
Yeah.
But he's the one who woke me up to remind me that I was still alive. He's the one who reminded me I was still kicking. So I actually can't take credit as if I was just like in this war mode the whole time. Like that comment when he said do the Steve Jobs thing, I was pissed at first. After a couple of days, I think after like 2 days, I was like, all right, you're right. I'm just here. I'm not dead yet. Let's figure something out. So then I thought about getting a job somewhere, and then I was like, okay, I can't get hired, not looking like this. That's when the law school thing came back into play. And so I studied for the LSAT bedridden and or mostly bedridden, I should say. And then Dominic would come over every single day before and after work and he would help me study. He would hold like a cold compress on the back of my neck to kind of keep me conscious. And he would like just sit there and help motivate me. And I remember, the reality is like, sorry to put this out there, Dom, but Dom was broke too. So but there was
We're all real in this space.
straight up, straight up. So like me and him are both like just broke as hell. And and we're just like on this weird journey. And
Hmm.
there was just this day that I could just never forget where essentially I was super hungry. He's broke, I'm broke. And because I'm so sick, there's only a few things I can eat. And he only had like $6 in his bank account. And I remember he went to the store and bought me berries. And then he came back and only had like 70 something cents in his bank account. And to me, that was the greatest gift I was ever given. And I said, like, what about you? Like, well, you need food. He said, I'll be all right. I'll figure it out. Like, you need this more than me. He said, just get into Harvard. And then, a few months later, I got into Harvard. But I just can't take Dom out of this story because without him showing up every single day, without him buying me those berries, without him telling me to be Steve Jobs again, uh, that just would have never happened. Harvard Law School would have never happened. And then when I did get into Harvard Law School, my story went viral. I ended up getting doctors. I'm alive.
So you got in when? When did your journey at
February.
Harvard start?
I got in March
Of
of 2020. I got accepted March of 2020. I didn't let people know until that summer. Then I went viral that summer. Tyler Perry saw my story. Harvard found out that I had a lot of health issues. So then I started getting access to the best doctors in the country. Tyler Perry helped cover my education.
Wow.
And quite frankly, all the resources that I thought I might get in death, I got in life. So I then never had to worry about my dad, someone else taking care of my dad. So I just went right back to taking care of my pops. And honestly, the rest of my 3 years at Harvard was really me just healing from my ailments. And then I ended up coming out on the other side.
What a journey.
Mm-hmm.
None of it expected. As you reflect
Mm-hmm.
on everything you just shared, what would you say are mottos that you now live by as a result of your lived experiences?
Honestly, I used to have like a lot. And I'll tell you my old one. I
Yeah.
remember Muhammad Ali used to say this quote. I'm probably misquoting it now, but it's something along the lines of like, I hated every minute of training, but I said, you know, keep training and spend the rest of my life as a champion, something along those lines. Now my motto is simply just be kind. Like you never know what people are going through. You don't know why people do what they do. And quite frankly, it doesn't cost anything. And
Amen.
so
my gosh, I
Yeah.
live by that for sure.
And so be kind and also like hold people accountable and hold yourself accountable. And I
Mhm.
think if we do all those things, quite frankly, that's like at least the basis of what a strong community needs. Because like when I think about my dad, he was always kind and he always held me accountable. And for those two reasons, I've always given him the most utmost respect. He held himself accountable. I hold myself accountable. And again, I think it's the little things
Absolutely. It's the little things that aren't little in the grand scheme of
for
things
sure.
because it's when nobody is looking, who are you as a person? How do you treat others? What do you hold yourself accountable for? What do you dedicate your time to? And that's not
For
to
sure.
say that people aren't allowed to kick back and relax. There's a
Exactly.
balance in life, of course, but it really is what when no one's looking, what is it that you're going to do?
Speaking of that, there was this instance at Harvard with a sanitation worker, which ended up leading to me creating a nonprofit. Um, I was a second year. Yeah, I was a 2L at the time. And 2L stands for second year law student. And I was walking down a hallway and she was walking towards me and I said, "Hi, how are you doing?" Talking to this custodian. And she said, "Oh, are you talking to me?" I said, "Yeah, how are you doing?" She said, "Me?" I said, "Yeah." And then she said, "Me again." I said, "Yes, you." She said, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry. Students don't talk to me. Students would rather look at the wall than talk to me." And I just said, "That's effed up."
It is.
Yeah. And I said, "To the degree that you want, I'll be happy to talk to you." And from there, that just made me curious, like how many other people felt this way. So I went around Harvard and I probably talked to about like maybe like anywhere between like 40 to 60 ish folks about like, how do you feel here? How do
All
students
custodian workers?
no, security guards,
Okay.
dining staff workers,
Mhm.
but different levels of support staff. And I was just kind of curious on like what was the general vibe of, how do people make you feel? And generally speaking, I walked away from that just saying, I want to create something that is just geared towards honoring like the blue collar support staff workers at Harvard. And so I said, maybe I'll create a student organization. I said, nah, I shouldn't do that because I didn't want to give anyone like the power to like dilute my vision.
Mhm.
So I actually I went out my way and created a 501c3 called the Reciprocity Effect. And it was simply geared to honor blue collar support staff workers. And essentially we're almost like becoming like make a wish for blue collar workers, but I'll get to that later.
I love that.
So essentially, we ended up creating like this big award ceremony because I kind of just thought it was jacked up that at some point we can acknowledge that deans deserve award ceremonies and banquets, students deserve award ceremonies and banquets, different levels of scholars do. But at some point, we say this demographic and below do not deserve these types of celebrations.
Even though they contribute to the success of everyone that does
A
get
thousand percent.
acknowledged.
A
Yeah.
1000%. And so essentially the first thing I did to open up the reciprocity effect was to hold a big banquet for all of the support staff for support staff workers at Harvard Law School. So I think like 30 people got awards in that first year. Over 200 people showed up. And I remember there were just a couple of quotes that like stood out to me that year. I remember one of the service workers said to me, some of these people never even gotten like trophies ever
Mm.
from, anywhere. And, you can look on their faces and say, wow, you can see how they're impacted. One person told me, I've never seen my son look at me so proudly. That was a really great one. And I think one that I felt very proud of was someone told me, I've never seen students, professors, and support staff sit in a room as equals before.
Mm.
And to me, that was cool because, we made it so that the support staff didn't have to clean up the event. So, it was just interesting that, yeah, we were all sitting there as equals, and not only just as equals, but, like, celebrating the support staff, whoever was given an award, it was just a great experience. And so for me, ever since then, we ended up doing a partnership with the Yankees, like, even after that, where we got like 50 sanitation workers in New York City to have lunch with the actual players. And then they even got awards there through the Yankees as well, so that was pretty cool. And, and then even going forward, we have some new stuff coming, like a lot more content creating. with
Nice.
maybe some really nice storytelling. We'll see what happens, but yeah, we have a lot of ideas in the works going forward. But in the meantime, I'm still also just an attorney. I do
Now we can get to
yeah,
that.
exactly.
How did you get into the role that you are now? First of all, what is your official role? What does your day look like?
Well, how did I get into it was actually pretty crazy. Again, I've never actually said this publicly, and I'll be happy to share it.
Here we
it,
go.
I initially got hired to be a chief of staff of an NFL team. Yeah, right.
What is your life?
Yeah, it was crazy. It was I'm pretty sure I would have been the youngest chief of staff in NFL history at that given time. But maybe I don't know if that's true or not, but I was 27 at the time.
Maybe it's
So
still in the cards for you. Who knows?
maybe. We'll see. But they ended up going a different way after we agreed, and then I ended up going to work for the firm that supported me with my health issues while I was a law student. And so
Mm.
I ended up going to work there. I'm in New York City now. I'm an M&A attorney. And I really just do multi-billion-dollar transactions on a monthly basis. Even this month alone in May, my deal volume equals up to 15 billion. And so I do that every day, work about 7 days a week. And I just work with some of the most brilliant people I've ever been around, and it's an honor to learn from them every single day.
If you could tell your 8-year-old self,
Mhm.
right, which is when you said
Mhm.
kind of changed your life, or even your high school
Mhm.
self, your middle school self that didn't even think you would get to see college,
Mhm.
right? What would you say?
You know, and this may sound interesting, but I think the main thing I probably would have told that little guy was protect your soul. Because I think obviously things worked out for me in the end, but I think it's really hard in life not to get jaded. And I think at different points that my younger self were going through these different phases of different types of trauma and trying to figure out how to respond to that. And then luckily I found the right people. But I honestly think I would just tell the little guy protect your soul, protect who you are. Even if you feel as though you don't have a support system, there are people out there who want to support you, and they're not too hard to find. And I just think being open and allowing yourself to really see your environment from a non-jaded lens allows you to just kind of live in a way that creates so many different opportunities.
100%. I also am a firm believer that you receive what you put out in this
Mhm.
world, and you're very clearly huge on paying it forward.
For sure.
And I think that's just good karma. Not that you
For
do it
sure.
to receive anything, but
Definitely.
life itself takes care of that.
Mhm.
That's beautiful.
For sure, for sure. Yeah, I mean, again, I was just very lucky that yeah, I'll say this. I just think being able to meet all the different types of people I have, from sanitation workers to ex-felons to CEOs to big time attorneys,
Mhm.
professors, deans. Uh Honestly just think, it just lets you know how much the world has to offer. Because you can learn something from everyone. And the second you start thinking that a certain population or a certain type of person can't contribute to your life, I think that's when you start blocking your own blessings.
Here's something I'd love to know. You just mentioned
Mhm,
people of all types of titles and roles. When you put those aside,
mhm.
what would you say they had in common?
Love, definitely. I think that's the first thing that I'd say. Whether we were talking about when it came to whoever chose to invest into me, there was some moment that they said, "I want to give this young man a piece of my time, a piece of my wisdom," and maybe some others said, "I just want to tell him keep going." Quite frankly, outside of love, that just had to have been the similar characteristic amongst them all of them.
Going back to something you said about the
Mhm,
reciprocity effect, which is it's a make a wish, right,
mhm,
for blue collared workers
yeah,
without any limitations,
mhm,
pie in the sky idea.
mhm,
Let's speak something into existence.
mhm.
What is something that you would love to make happen through your organization?
That's a really great question. That's a really great question. You know, I think the best way that I think I could answer that question right now is I at least want to be able to just say, in some way, shape, or form, I honored 100,000 different folks. As of right now, I think that's what's at the top of my mind. Just throwing a random number out there. If I could hit 100,000, I'll just be very content.
Okay. What about your concept of success? Not necessarily just talking about you as an attorney or you as the founder of this organization, but in general, what is it that you define as success? And when you have reached it in the past,
Mhm.
what has allowed you to take a step further and be like, okay, now this is what's next?
You know what's interesting? This is something I actually also haven't said, like, on camera before. I was actually having a really deep conversation about 2 weeks ago with a coworker, because he said, he views me as one of the most successful people that he's ever met. I
Hmm.
mean, even just 4 months ago, I raised somebody $1,000,000, completely unrelated to my job.
You're going to have to tell us that story
Thank you.
next.
Yeah, next. But just saying that to say, I kinda told him, you know, to me, like, I never actually viewed myself to be that successful. And that may sound crazy, and I'm not even saying that, like, in a humble way. But, for example, not to be, like, too emotional, but
You can be, it's a safe
thank
space.
you, thank you. I think about, like, things that I really wanted to be. Like, I always wanted to be, like, a really great fighter. It could have been boxing, MMA, or something. Like, that's something I really wanted, and I wasn't able to make that happen. I pivoted, and then I was able to, create other scenarios, success in other areas. But those were things that I did to more so, like, support my dad. And remember, the end goal of supporting my father was always, like, letting him take, like, a seat back and just being able to, like, take care of him and allowing him to, like, experience all the things that we might have talked about just, like, growing up. Because me and my dad never even got to go on a vacation together. Like, most of our time spent together was working out or watching TV.
The little things,
Yeah,
though.
the little things, right? But it would have been nice to be able to, like, go somewhere with them.
Of course.
So I start getting this, like, so I start my job in September of 2023, making a great salary, right? And then he died 3 months later, like, so anticlimactic. And it was just one of those, it was like the second time I ever really wanted something. And I fell just short, like, just short of being able to, like, hit the thing that I wanted. Cause although I've succeeded in a lot of these other areas, like, they tend to just be like supplements of, like, making decisions on the fly and making the best of a worst case scenario. And so what does this have to do with success? I honestly then had this, like, reawakening, like, after my dad passed, of, like, what is happiness? And I don't want to, like, sound too dramatic and say happiness is a choice, but to some degree, I didn't think of myself as being that poor when my dad was alive because I was having a good time with my dad.
And because you were
Yeah.
rich in life.
I was rich in life. There you go. I always felt wealthy,
Mhm.
like, with the love I received from my dad. And even though we never went on a vacation, I never looked at our time together, like watching TV or like working out, as like time not well spent. And so, in short, success just became this thing to me of, like, almost equivalent to, like, being able to, like, appreciate your day-to-day life. And if you can, like, truly have that sentiment, I think you're successful. I mean, I can now say I know, like, millionaires and billionaires that aren't happy with their day-to-day life. And when I think about my dad and his relationship to, like, me and my brother, he was one of the happiest guys I ever knew. And I used to think he didn't complain just because he was the toughest guy in the world. But, and as tough as he was, I also just realized he also just didn't need much. And he was very content with watching me and my brother grow up and becoming the men we became. Saying all that to say, to me, like, success is just really being able to wake up in the mirror, like, wake up in the morning and look in the mirror and just genuinely saying, I appreciate the life I have.
I love that. We're gonna get to the $1,000,000 raised in a second,
For
but
sure.
I think it's important to think about you for a second.
Hmm.
How do you practice self-care? How do you take care of you? You
Sure.
took care of the collective
Yeah.
for so long. You're now paying it forward through your organization, but how do you take care of you? How do you love you?
You know, this is gonna sound like silly, but I just love doing like for example, I love watching TV. Right. I love watching TV. Like to be able to like watch whether it's like a show called Power or any other random like basketball or boxing show that's coming on TV, I'll be happy to watch that. I love playing mini golf and like playing ping pong and seeing my friends and taking time to talk to like my friends from back home, like in Maryland or whether it's Boston, just staying connected with people that I love and making sure that I actually have the time to do that like consciously. Because like, my job takes up so much time. But literally, like I said, after my dad died, I had this like reawakening of like what I need my life to look like.
Totally.
And me just making sure that I put that time into like spending time with the people I care about and doing those little things that make me happy. Like those are always a must
Absolutely. And that's so important
for sure.
to live and to remember,
Hmm.
especially when times get busy or you feel like, oh my gosh, there are just not enough hours in the day. But
Def
you're important too.
for sure.
Even if it's 15 minutes,
Hmm.
20, whatever the case may be, that's a priority as well.
1,000,000%.
Now tell us about the $1 million raise because you can't just drop that and
For
not
sure.
say it.
So my friend like has this startup. I don't want to say the name, but
That's okay.
he has this startup and he's a brilliant guy. Honestly, the most brilliant guy I might have ever met in my life. He's my age and he was a classmate at Harvard. And, most people, I bet any classmate who watches this is going to know exactly who I'm talking about. But he created this like one of a kind startup and essentially, he just told me that he really would like assistance in this series B. And I told him how much time do I have to help you raise what you need to raise? And he just said 1 million would be good. And 4 weeks later, we got him 1 million.
Wow.
Yeah. Literally, I had knew a high net worth individual in DC. I had been pitching this to the guy, like, on the side, and he eventually said, "I wanna meet the guy," so we, like, brought him down from New York to DC, and then, my friend took it the rest of the way, and then the 1,000,000 was there.
What does the startup do?
He essentially turned athletes into a stock market, so
Mm,
if you don't wanna risk, like, I guess. Or let's just say this, you can say this 2 different ways. Whether you like fantasy sports and you like investing into, like, those types of ventures, instead of investing in Walmart, you could put your money in LeBron James.
okay.
Um, and then or if you're someone who says, "I don't know anything about the stock market, but I know a lot about athletes," you could then treat the athlete as a stock market.
Yeah. As a non-sports girly,
Yeah,
I appreciate how
for
you
sure,
explain that.
for sure.
Okay. What a cool idea. And
And
also how great that you were able to and willing, to make it happen.
for sure. And again, I actually got nothing out of that. That was literally just more so just me playing my part because I consider him my teammate. And you know, I was just happy to be able to be a part of that. Yeah.
To close us out, what advice would you have for anyone currently struggling personally or professionally to seek the motivation that they maybe lack and the confidence in themselves to put in that extra effort or to find opportunities that will get them one step closer to wherever it is that they're trying to get to?
You know, the thing that worked for me, and I actually do think every individual is so unique that people just need their own different antidotes. But I think one thing that I think everyone could benefit from hearing is just remembering that you're alive. Like,
Yeah.
and you are like your choices just matter. Like on how you wake up, like your perspective matters, like all these things from the moment you wake up that are in your control. If you like write them down, like what is in my control? You can say my attitude. You can say, you know, you could just say we could just name a lot of different things that we have direct control over our actions.
Yeah.
And I think like just understanding that we just can't surrender that power to other people. We can't surrender that power to bad times. As long as we maintain a strong hold on that ability to say that I am in control of my life and my actions. I just think that's the start. The second thing I would say is, no one does it alone. If you need to talk to people who love you, if you feel as though you don't have those people who like light that fire under you, refer back to number one and find those people. Because I just think the reality is we have so much power that we often surrender to our own feelings. We surrender them to bad times. We surrender them. We surrendered our agency to being jaded. If we can just maintain that power, I just think you tend to find yourself in pretty fun environments when we maintain that control.
Absolutely. Is there anything that we didn't touch on that you think is important to share with the world?
I think we touched on everything, but I think maybe the one thing I'd like to highlight is, like, I really mean it when I say, like, I don't know anyone that I've met. I don't know. I can't think of one single person that I've met who is a major success, who feels that it was not a combination of hard work, luck, and a support system. Like those three things. And there's one quote that really sticks out to me. This guy, I think he freed the most human beings in US or world history. Like, he's freed over 6,000 incarcerated people. Like, it's a very insane record. And I remember I just asked him the basic question of like, what separated you from like other people who were like at a similar talent, like talent level as you. And I'll just never forget it. He said, most people never get the pass thrown to them. And then he says, and if you do, you then have to catch it.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know why that stuck with me so much, but it was just kind of just this idea that, there's like, just as much as I said there's so much in our control, there is like so much out of our control.
Yeah.
And I just think kind of always keeping that in perspective is necessary because we're not going to win at everything. Like I've lost many times at many different things. And I'll keep moving forward and keep finding ways to be grateful and ways to be thankful. And I win in these other ways where people tend to not see me as someone who ever took losses. And I don't know if that point really rings home, but I guess my main point within saying all of this is, at least going back to that quote, like, you can't control if you'll get the pass, but you can control like your attitude and you can control your actions in the meantime.
I would almost amend one of the three things that you said. You mentioned luck, and I'm a firm believer that luck isn't just this thing. It's really when preparation meets opportunity,
Sure.
which highlights what you were saying. You can only control so many things in that equation of preparation and opportunity. You can't necessarily control the opportunities that present themselves, but you can control what you're doing today, what you're doing now, those baby steps, so that when the opportunity shows, if it's meant for you, you can fully show up and take it. Last thing, how can we support the reciprocity effect?
I honestly just think the best way that anyone can support the reciprocity effect is more so just taking the time to honor people in your environment. Like, I don't care if they're blue collar workers. I don't care if it's just the friendly neighborhood person walking down the street. I just honestly think the spirit of the reciprocity effect is simply just making sure that we see people just by virtue of like existing and just not turning a blind eye to just giving that respect, I suppose. And I just think I think that's the most I'd ask from anybody is just to make sure we see people.
Okay, amazing. Well, you have a fellow supporter.
Thank you.
Seriously, from the moment I met you. Thank you, the University of Maryland, obviously, for putting each other in each other's paths. I know that you said that, you've turned down podcasts and opportunities like these. So it really does mean the world that You were so generous with your time
Thank
and
you.
with your story. Please know that you have a home here
Appreciate
in this
you.
space, and you have my
Appreciate you.
full support in any future projects that you do that I cannot wait to hear more about.
Thank you.
But in the meantime, in addition to thank you for joining us, thank you everyone listening and watching for joining us as well. This now wraps another episode of Convos with Sazón. Until next time.